say someone has been a devout meditator and now they're wondering, like, holy shit, am I actually doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, what would you say to that person who's now maybe more confused and has more questions, which maybe is a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I joke that I'm, spend my life as supposedly, some people call me a spiritual teacher. It's not really a term I like, but yeah. I spend my life telling people not to do spiritual practice, even though I'm a spiritual teacher. I'm basically trying to dissuade people constantly from it, but sort of half serious, half joking, but hardcore enlightenment seeker guy for a good decade. I saw in real time both the lights and the serious shadows of that approach. And I don't want people to go through what I went through.
Hey you guys, IRENE LYON here. Welcome to this long form interview with my good friend, colleague, mentor, Chris Dierkes. This is a conversation that I have been wanting to share with you for a very long time, and now it's happening. This conversation is probably one of the most comprehensive chats you will hear on meditation, mindfulness, what these things really are, how we've taken them from the East and tried to implant them into the West, where meditation, mindfulness is beneficial and when it is not. We talk about deep sea creatures that lurk and live in ourselves and our mind and our psyche and our body, how we need to be aware that those things exist because they can sometimes pop up when we get into deep spiritual practice. We talk about things that I just don't ever hear people talk about when it comes to these mind-body practices that we seem to just dose out and prescribe left, right, and center for all sorts of things. So I want to encourage you to watch this in its entirety. I know it's a little long, like I mentioned. Watch it in 10-minute chunks, 20-minute chunks, however you want to get through this. I will really suggest that this is something that you spend some time on if you know you want to dive more into meditation and mindfulness, or maybe you are already in that world. This will give you, I think, a deeper insight and look into this concept that really we are just new at here in the Western world. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. Enjoy our chat and leave a comment. Let us know what you think, and we will see you on the other side.
People, just a quick biography of who you are, what you do.
Who is the guy in the black hoodie? I was first a monk, which kind of explains the hoodie. Just kind of
it's your robe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's good, actually.
I was a monk. I was in the Christian tradition. I was raised Roman Catholic for 4 years. I was a member of a religious order and had vows and the whole bit. That was not the life for me, but I did feel like maybe I should be both married, and I was still drawn to working as a clergy person. So I switched denominations where you could actually get married and be a pastor. And I finished seminary and worked for 3 years as a priest in the Anglican Church in Canada, which is Episcopalian for the Americans. And I did that for some years, and I was really drawn into Christian mysticism. I was also really into other religious spiritual traditions, including some forays into some Buddhism, which will probably come up in our mindfulness discussion. And then now, almost 4 years ago, I decided to take a leave of absence and try out this, starting my own private practice, which originally I thought was going to be more kind of in a classic kind of Reiki energy healing thing, but turned out to be this kind of hard to explain, wilder soul work thing, which lack a better word for it. Part energy healing, part intuition, part spiritual direction of a sort.
Curious, if we go back, what called you, you started off by saying you were a monk. And it's so interesting because the vision I get when I hear monk is like red robes up on a temple in Nepal.
Right.
What, for you, what was it that drew you to this world, and how was your monkhood,
Right.
different than the shaved head monks that we may actually associate with meditation, etc.?
Right. So I was a member of a group in the Catholic Church called the Jesuits. The current Pope is a Jesuit. So it's a religious order. So we had vows like a monk, and we lived in community. So I had vows of poverty, celibacy, obedience. But we lived and worked in the world.
Okay.
So I did things like I worked as a chaplain at a maximum security men's wing at a jail in Detroit.
Wow.
Visiting inmates for a year and a half. I taught English as a second language to immigrants in the south side of Chicago. I lived in Guam, an island in the Pacific. I lived in Peru. So I was kind of thrown around in lots of different places, and mostly oriented in neighborhoods where there were strong justice issues and structural economic kinds of things. And I mean, I'd been raised in a pretty safe, comfortable kind of middle America, white bread kind of place. So I was broken from my cultural habits and kind of saw the underside of the world.
And maybe I missed it, you got drawn into this. Was there like some aha moment when you were really young?
I was totally the guys who did the people who did when we had our grade school graduation, and so and so is going to be a doctor when they grow up, and this person's going to be the president or whatever. He's going to be a priest. So I mean, they picked it. So fair enough. They called that one. So I was an altar boy. I was very pious. I was very devout. And I went to a Jesuit-run high school. So I went to an all-male prep school for high school, and seeing them, and some were lawyers and teachers, and I was really drawn to their strong spiritual practice, but that they lived in the worldly way. They didn't just kind of live in these weird churches or monasteries off in the country.
Right. They were part of everyday Western industrialized society.
And trying to be contemplative in the midst of an active life.
Got it.
And that was a draw to me.
Cool. Yeah. So if we go back to this contemplative practices, if we just were to say define, if I was to allow you to actually define what is meditation, what is mindfulness, are they different? How do you see it? Where would you go with that question?
Meditation is a broad term, I think, that can include a lot of different kinds of meditations. So mindfulness is a very specific, largely originally Buddhist. Now it's attempting to be kind of expanded in a more non-sectarian, I suppose, or secular way. But the kinds of contemplation or meditation I were taught, given that I was Christian, were heavily prayer-oriented practices from the Christian tradition. So generally in the literature, they would divide meditation. This is a little simplistic, but it's a good beginning thing. That there's kinds of meditation that are meant to build concentration.
Okay.
So those are technically referred to as concentrative meditation practices. So that would be like a mantra, repetition of or an affirmation, repetition of a short phrase or prayer, and you keep repeating it until your energy and your attention is really drawn to those words, and then it kind of everything is focused,
funneled into one point in a sense.
Yeah.
So that would be, let's say, what we would call TM, transcendental meditation, would be more of a
that kind.
Okay.
That kind, or people, if they're taught at the beginning of, if they're taught a kind of generic meditation practice, and they're taught first to count their breaths,
right,
from 1 to 10, and then from 10 back to 1. And if they lose their count, start
over again.
Do it again. That's a concentration-based technique. It's supposed to build up your ability to not have your mind just be blah, 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 the whole time.
Okay, that's good clarification, because I've actually never heard that first distinction you just made. So
concentration-based.
Yeah, and so then what's the other?
Non-concentration based, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Awareness or dispersal techniques.
Dispersal. Okay.
Mindfulness would fall into this category.
Okay.
So you're not focusing on a specific thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're letting your attention become wide.
Yeah.
And whatever happens or whatever arises, you go with that. So you're not meant to be focusing on a specific thing or blocking other things out. You're just going to try to let everything be as it is.
Would you say it's very much being in the present moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The trick with mindfulness is that, I mean, that's part one of it, I would say.
Okay, good. All right, I'm taking notes. Part one.
Part one is this wider awareness and letting things be as they are, and not trying to immediately go, I like this, I don't like that, I want to experience more of this, I don't want that.
No, not changing it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to evaluate and preference.
Yep. Non-judgment. Okay, so that's part one.
Part one.
Part two.
Which is usually in this kind of, which maybe kind of get into our conversation, this kind of contemporary Western mindfulness thing. Often part two is being kind of left out.
Okay.
Depending on where you're learning it. So the Buddhists would say, this is, and again, I've been a kind of sympathetic and admiring tourist. So I should claim I'm not in the same way that I was really well developed in the Christian tradition.
Sure. But I might also add there that you may have actually more knowledge on the ethics of this than even some current day mindfulness teachers. I'm just going to add that in.
2 week training, people who get certificates, for example. Yeah.
Yes.
Fair. I think that's a fair point.
Okay. So in part two that we tend to leave out is...
Well, it goes back to the original meaning of the word. So a lot of Western Buddhist scholars would say that the translation of the word into English as mindfulness is already kind of problematic.
Okay.
And I would agree with them.
Okay.
The original word is sati, which is in the Pali language, which was the language of the original Buddhist canon. And sati really means memory.
Okay.
It means remembrance.
Okay.
So in Buddhism, mindfulness practice, or sati, is remembering truths.
Got it.
In real-time present experience. So part one is to have this open-minded, open being kind of way of being. But the second part of it is to inspect experience as it arises.
Inspect.
And in Buddhist language, the inspection is occurring according to Buddhist teaching, which is that everything is impermanent, nothing remains. Clinging to anything and trying to make it permanent when it's inherently impermanent will eventually lead to deep suffering. And that actually is what, so if you go to one of those like 8-day Vipassana retreats in silence, you will actually be taught that. They will repeatedly tell you no self, impermanence, suffering if you attach to everything. And so you both have the openness, but you're also inspecting the experience to watch it basically cycle. And in their teaching, to cycle through to a point where you realize that everything comes, everything goes.
Ebb and flow.
and you just kind of ride the wave, basically.
Got it.
And there's
I
some
can tell there's an
questions.
and there.
And so there's a couple of things. I mean, one, and people teaching more, I don't want to call it generic, but
Sure, you can.
whatever that word I'm looking for is, mindfulness in a broader, non-specifically Buddhist way.
Mm-hmm.
They are generally leaving out the second part.
Got it.
So, it's like, become aware of your emotions, and that will help you feel less anxiety, or be mindful of your body sensations, and then you'll feel more relaxed or less stressed or something. But that's not what it was created for.
And this is an important distinction, because you said to me in the email that you sent, which I have right here, I'm going to read it. My meditation was for spiritual awakening. So we'll go back to that in a second. It was not, and you capital that not, for making you feel better. It was not for getting rid of anxiety. If anything, if you get serious enough into meditation for a time, it massively increases anxiety. And I would agree with that based on the self-awareness practices I teach my students.
Yeah.
It was not meant to help relieve pain symptoms. Those might happen as a side effect, positive or negative, depending on the nature of the person, but it was not the purpose. From what I've seen, and I'm not diving into the research the way I did in academia, because it just drives me bonkers, but it's being touted as this way to, if we think about John Kabat-Zinn created mindfulness-based stress reduction, it's in workplaces as a means to release stress. Do you think that using the term mindfulness and meditation in those stress-based reduction, decrease pain practices, should it even be called these words?
It's a really good question. And, well, I mean, yeah, so I think there's a philosophical point to take a step back, which is, should we be in the business of reducing stress?
Right.
Before you bring in the question of, is meditation the way to reduce the stress? Is stress reduction in and of itself a goal? Is it a valid goal? Is it masking something else? Is anxiety reduction? I mean, it sounds like on the surface, of course, we're like, who wants more anxiety? Who wants more stress? It's great. Why don't we get rid of it? Sure. But if that stress in workplace situation is because the organization is dysfunctional,
chaotic,
and they're making people work ungodly hours at low pay, then should the meditation technique be in there to basically mask what is actually a structural justice issue, I would say?
I love it. Yes.
No, I'm not okay with that. I don't think that's what it's set up for. So the question, obviously, with stress or anxieties is those are generally, in my experience, communications from a person's being, or a system itself might be communicating something is awry.
You got it.
And I would be more concerned with what is awry and what could we do about what is awry. Now, maybe meditation could help with that, depending on what the nature of the underlying thing is.
Yeah.
Or does, in the worst case, stress reduction turn into people are less sensitized to stress? That's actually a message in their system, that something in their being is kind of going off, and then all of a sudden their back goes out, or they get super depressed, or
And this is, as you know my work. We've worked together. For those of you watching who maybe aren't familiar with my work, you can learn about that later. But my line of sight, my perspective, is working at that autonomic nervous system level, which we need a nervous system, obviously, to survive in many realms of our system. But when there has been trauma, adversity, high levels of chronic stress, industrialized living, just like you said, that corporation that is overworking their people, the system goes off and it can never fully find baseline. which is why we're trying to manage and cope with stress. But as you said, the management and the trying to get rid of the anxiety is simply a band-aid or a quick fix for an issue that is way deeper, and it's cellular. I got to tell this story. Long ago, I used to do fitness and nutrition workshops for companies. I did it for like once because I hated it. The guy's like, I want you to do something about nutrition and exercise, the importance of, pausing. And I was really quite young. This was before I got into neuroplasticity, but I understood exercise and nutrition. And he goes to me, so I want you to teach them this, tell them that it's important, but oh, by the way, can you tell them that they can't do this during their workday? And I'm like, okay, I guess I have to, because you're paying me good money to be with them for 3 hours. So I and he told me this like 5 minutes before I went out to this workshop. I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, you want me to tell them about having a better work-life balance, but you want it to happen not in the main bulk of their hours that they're awake. Yeah. And it just made me feel sick. And it was ever since then I've chosen to never really go into corporate settings unless the corporation is set up to allow their workers to have time in the day to decompress. All it is management. Yeah. Right. So a second ago, when I read that little piece that you emailed me, the first point was that meditation was for spiritual awakening, not for pain relief. What is the situation that you see we've gotten ourselves into by bringing on this concept of, say, meditation or mindfulness on as a way to pain relieve and to manage stress, when really its purpose wasn't for that? And I mean, one of the biggest similarities, or I should say parallels, that I look at is yoga. As you know, yoga is a practice that had nothing to do with flexibility and strength, and yet that's what we completely monetized it as in the Western world. Yeah. So what do you see happening there?
A lot of things.
Yeah, if you're really honest.
So, I mean, one is, I think very deeply that mindfulness practice, I think there's a major question of, it grows organically and very deeply out of the Buddhist tradition. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's so easy to just take it, like you can take the plant or flower just out of one soil, move it across the ocean, plunk it down in another one. We've sometimes seen that where people introduce non-native species and then they kind of overgrow a place. So because without predators, so there's an ecological question. Before one was ever taught meditation in those traditions, you were first taught ethics.
And I want you to ethics, I actually have a post-it note here to remind you. Yes.
And that is totally getting thrown out the window with it now being commercialized and the focus being not any longer on spiritual awakening per se or precisely or primarily. So you were taught ethics, you were taught cultivation of things like compassion, loving kindness, generosity. These are very deep in Buddhism. They're very deep in religious traditions as a whole. Yeah. And so the spiritual technologies assume an entire culture of practice.
Before even meditation begins.
Right. And especially something like Vipassana, mindfulness meditation, which is a highly advanced form of meditation. Yes. So usually first the ethics training, then usually the concentration-based meditation techniques. Uh-huh. Then the more awareness, because those practices basically just take your consciousness and your attention, and they're just a depth charge. They just shoot you down to the bottom. Mm-hmm. and it can disturb who knows what's under, who knows what's down under those dark waters of your psyche. And you get a depth charge just fire down to the bottom of your being, hits the bottom, and whatever, you know, like you ever watch those nature documentaries with those weird creatures that live
underneath that nobody's ever discovered, and then all of a sudden it's like, we just found this new thing.
They're kind of creepy, you know. So we have those kind of beings, I would say, living in our depths. And if you just take somebody, now again, like, depends on the person way this is doing, but if you're doing this kind of little 2-minute mindfulness thing to feel a little better, you're not, you know, going all the way down. But if somebody is, hey, I'm learning about meditation, hey, you should go on this 8-day silent retreat where you're going to meditate 7 hours a day and there's nothing else going on, and you're going to do it for 8 days in a row, you are very likely potentially going to bring something, a kraken, out of the ocean that you're not ready for.
Exactly.
And that can be seriously confronting and seriously worrisome, because the only thing you have at that point in those traditions is just keep to that specific meditation practice.
Yes.
So if trauma, as you would say, or seriously charged emotion, or depending on your metaphysics, some wilder experience, maybe an ancestor memory or some really early life thing,
flashbacks,
something in the womb, it comes up, you're just supposed to keep staying aware, watching it eventually pass away. Well, what if it stays there for 20 years? What if it takes 20 years for it to pass away? If it passes, absolutely. If it's anger, is this, I'm witnessing my anger, is that just teaching subtle forms of dissociation?
Right. And I want to get back to the dissociation piece. So I want to go back quickly. I want to also hit on dissociation. I want to hit on these sea creatures that might be living deep in our psyche. But I want to go back to the ethics.
Yeah.
Because what you just outlined is never talked about. It was only you that talked about this to me maybe it was a year ago. We had this conversation the first time. But, you know, before you get to that point of vast feeling, the second part of the meditation that you mentioned, Vipassana, there's ethics, and then there's the concentrative meditations, and we're just throwing people into these 10-day Vipassana retreats without any, I mean, my stuff is all about building foundation and capacity in the nervous system. That is often not even a concept that's even put in at all. But then you've got the ethics. So tell me about the ethics. What does that mean, actually?
Yeah, I mean, there's ethics. And the other point I would name there in terms of foundations is these are practices that largely grow out of, since we mentioned monks, they're largely practices that grow out of monasteries.
Yes.
Monasteries are places, and here we're talking not the kind of monastery per se I lived in, but like your traditional, what you think of as a monastery, where your entire life is regulated basically from the second you wake up, when you have your meals, when the meditation times are, when your work periods are, when you go to sleep. I mean, it's highly controlled. And everything is kind of built to reduce stressors, basically. Everything like vows of silence, bells, living out in the country, hearing the birds chirp, right? Everything is meant to create a lot of serenity.
Yes.
People care, you know, other people deal with making the food, and you can read and meditate all day, right? So it allows for the ability, that's all there to support the culture of being able to inspect the mind really, really
deeply.
And then we imagine we could just take that practice again out of its original context. No thoughts. Yeah, just we're going to, with people who have cell phones, crazy amounts of
Lives.
email, lives, spouses, kids, who knows,
They have to cook, clean, do everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. How easy is it just to take a highly monastic practice and imagine you can just take it to people who aren't monks and, hey, no problem, your lives are a little different, but it's just a technology, so no worries. It can just be abstracted. And then ethics side is spiritual practices and the kind of awareness that can come from it. Even one could say the power, I suppose, that comes from it could be used for good or for ill.
It's very Star Wars.
Yes, exactly. So the force is, you can have the light side of the force, you have the dark side of the force.
Yes.
So the traditions are actually quite honest about this in a way that I think we're a bit naive in our day, with the kind of, hey, everybody should try this out, it's good for everybody, la, la, la. The ethics is there to make sure that a person has the right intention.
Yes.
Is their intention of service? Is there intention of love? Is there intention of becoming more aware so they can be more caring, more compassionate, more generous? And if so, then you learn the various techniques, because there is a lot of, especially if you get really into them and they really start doing what they do, there can be a lot of charisma, there can be a lot of grace, there can be a lot of energy that circulates around a person, and that can get persons, we all have our dark sides.
Yep.
And so if we start to think that we're so enlightened that we do no wrong and we walk on air, and then we're very likely potentially to, do some damage.
An example of that, like what would be something that you've seen where you've seen that lightness and love and good get hijacked?
Yeah. The extreme examples are the very terrible culty things that we have all heard about through the news, right?
Right.
Those would be kind of your extreme examples. Less extreme is the fact that no matter what spiritual awareness a person may have, we're still human beings. And as human beings, we're fallible creatures. And so there's spiritualities that keep our feet on the ground, in my experience. And there's others that can tend towards this world as a, ambiguous, I don't like it so much, here's my spaceship, to leave and start becoming less and less human. We've talked about this before. The fancy word for that is bypassing.
Spiritual bypass.
Yeah. And again, that's a kind of, I would say, misuse or abuse of what are otherwise genuine, powerful, and positive techniques. But again, monks in medieval India, who were geniuses of the human psyche in many regards, also did not have to face the various issues that we're facing. So they didn't come up with responses for, what do you do about, they didn't know about genetically inherited trauma patterns. It's not really part of their thing. And to be fair, that's not what they were focused on.
No.
So our way of practicing these things, I think, has to be a lot more up to date, and be willing to say this practice is very valuable, but we need to place it perhaps within a different container. Then
with soil and water. If you use that analogy of taking a plant, it almost is like, first of all, we can admire the plant over there, but we really shouldn't just pluck it out and drop it over here. We just need to create our own seeds, our own gardens, because it's true, it's just not transferable, that controlled monastic life. When you started talking about that, I was like, oh, that sounds nice. Wake up and your food's cooked and all you do is read and sit. Okay, so what was I saying?
That you wanted to go live in a monastery.
Oh yeah. So the interesting thing is I don't want to go live in a monastery. I quite like my industrial capitalistic nature of helping people and drinking wine and making food myself and all these things. But to go back to that analogy of the plant, I don't even know if there's a solution right now. Obviously, I do the work I do, you do the work you do. But I'm seeing a lot of these practices that are being taken. People are going to train in other parts of the world. A lot of times people will go to places like Bali, India, Costa Rica, very destination-y resorts where they're learning these things, these practices, and it just isn't teaching them how to bring it into the real everyday grind. And I don't even know if there's a question there. It's just more a contemplation on my side. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it runs deep. And it goes back, at least in part, relative to mindfulness. It goes to the question of whether it's properly translated as mindfulness. I mean, already we have a Western culture that's heavily mind-centric.
Yes.
Or rational-oriented to the exclusion, I would argue, I think you agree, we talk about this, of emotions and sensation and bodily being. And then you take this meditation technique and then call it mindfulness. Well, it's going to immediately click into our brains as Westerners, as English speakers. We're going to hear that as, oh, I'm supposed to focus my attention up here somewhere, and I make it go wider or whatever, and then I have non-judgment, and that's good, and that's going to help me feel calmer or better or something.
Yeah.
And we have these cultural pathologies like that we're supposed to feel better as opposed to feel.
Yeah.
And then this practice, which has a long history in an entirely different culture, which did not grow out of a culture that spent a bunch of time arguing about positive emotions and negative emotions. And I want to feel better and I want to have a healthier lifestyle. Like that wasn't part of their thing. Yeah. So the practice comes sort of flying in, and then it just gets subsumed to a different agenda. And the practice in and of itself is not going to bring that kind of social consciousness.
Yeah.
It's not meant to, it's not designed to, and it won't. So if it's treated just as a very simple technology, then that technology can be deployed in all kinds of different ways for different motivations. But if we don't reflect on what the agendas are, what is the motivation, what is the intention, are those good intentions? Is stress reduction in and of itself
what we want?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Mindfulness is not going to teach you that. That's not what it's designed for.
Exactly. And I like what you said a moment ago, the idea of trying to feel better versus feeling.
Yeah.
And when I work with my people, there's this, like you said, pathology. There are these problems. People are highly dysregulated in their arousal responses to stress, their regulation capacity to soothe, to go to sleep at night or to wake up in the morning. So we have this physiology individually, but also collectively, that is either too chaotic or too shut down. And I want to go back to what you said about dissociation, because if I turn the page to another topic around this, I see a lot of people that come to me who think they've been meditating or practicing mindfulness, and then we start working together and they cannot even bear to sense a sensation in their heart or in their gut or in their neck. And it's very clear that they have been deluded into thinking that they are actually more calm, when in fact they're just more shut down. Could you speak to that in terms of I mean, I understand what has happened. I know you understand, but what's your commentary on this situation that is actually quite epidemic?
In the spiritual practices itself, it's very subtle as to how it's being, I mean, we've talked about all the pieces that should go around a spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. And I think the old style actually has a lot to commend to it. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty old school for all of my, and I'm more contemporary. I think there's a lot of wisdom that was accrued over many years of a kind of ordering and then a certain logic, and not throwing people in the deep end. So as to specifically dissociative possibilities, it depends on whether a person is being taught like witnessing. So oftentimes you'll hear the meditation, the pointer, the action that's being promoted is a kind of, go back.
Right.
Almost like your attention or your energy is moving backwards. Mm-hmm. And then, you'll hear people say like, life is like a movie screen and you just watch the pictures come and go. And you can do that. That's a thing that can certainly be done. Mm-hmm. And it can, if, in the right amount, could help to create some healthy distance for people who are too caught up in something, get a little space, get a little perspective. Mm-hmm. But if that's kind of the go-to move, and I speak about this from personal experience because that was the style I was trained in, and I messed myself up pretty good for a while.
Okay.
So I speak from experience on this one.
Yeah.
If I'm watching the screen of my consciousness and grief keeps coming up.
Yes.
Maybe that grief needs to be attended to. Maybe I need to put a pause on the just watching everything go by moment, and I need to actually grieve. Maybe I actually need to feel the grief, mourn, complete it, and then if I want to come back to the resting in a big spacious awareness until the next thing comes up that needs to be attended to. That would make more sense than just maintain this watching pose, because then, and you can get terms like in English, people say equanimity or, equilibrium and so on. But that can easily be this kind of, and you can get people who are this kind of spiritual jerks, frankly. Like they're kind of mean. They're kind of, they don't have a lot of happiness or affection or kind of like human warmth about them.
And the empathy isn't really there.
Yeah. Like what's that about? I don't really think that's what Jesus and Buddha and everybody were going on about, to be just like stone-faced and like that all the time.
I'm calm and serene even though I have all this crap swimming inside. And what you just gave that example of, watching the grief go by, if we go back to that idea of, sea creatures living in our depths, it's kind of to me, I'm seeing this vision of, rather than diving into the water and seeing what is maybe there that needs to be rescued and tended to, it's standing on the shore, just looking in, going, that's nice, but we're not going to touch that because I don't want to. Because what you said is watching that float by, the grief, very different than feeling the visceral quality of it.
Yeah.
And we just haven't been taught how to feel these deep emotions. It's been praised in many ways to stay stone cold and to push through. So then that brings me to this question. Like, if we think of the monks, the monastery, high up in the hill, are those people diving in to feel these deep pains? Is it actually being touched? Or do they not have those pains because they're not living in this kind of Western industrial world?
Well, I think there's the basic universal pains of existence.
Yeah. Can you explain that a little bit?
Death, mortality, I mean, the Buddha was this prince, and his dad kept him in this place where only young people were and only good looking people. And he only had the best foods, and he snuck out. And then when he snuck out, he met somebody who was sick, and he met somebody who was dying, and he met somebody who was old and hobbled. And, you know, and it was that flipped his brain, like, whoa, this is actually our human condition. And then he goes and runs off to seek a resolution to the deep existential angst that was brought up in his being by seeing that level of some graphic stuff right in his face. That's what led him to become who he was. So that stuff is universal. The specific forms of our pains are, I think, pretty distinct. You know, I'm not a yak farmer in medieval Tibet. It's different, you know, like I would be doing backbreaking, you know, labor every day.
Sure. This
scenario we live in, it's much more kind of an emotional, mental stress given my work and so on. So those are different, but the underlying core is the same. The question of, are the monks feeling, really depends on what kind of practice they're doing, I think. So there are these, but they tend to be the minor traditions in my experience. Like in the East, they're referred to as Tantra. In the Jewish tradition, they're Kabbalah. In the Christian tradition, there's mysticism. They do say that everything that comes before you is what you face, versus a whole lot of other spiritual practices that are kind of just get out of this thing. Like, go where it's nice.
Exit.
Go where it's peaceful and get the hell out of this, you know, mess here. There's nothing to be redeemed here. Versus the ones that say, this already is the place. So if the grief is what comes up, if it's the anger, if it's desire, if it's aggression, these are the things to feel all the way through with your presence. And when you do, they liberate.
Exactly.
That's alchemy. That's one spiritual argument. Yeah. And I come from that. I should say my bias is in that.
Yeah.
That school of thought versus this stuff is just a bunch of chaos. It's a mess. It's a poop pile. You know, don't get at and don't do it.
Don't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Just get the hell out. And to be fair, there are spiritual technologies that a person can learn, at least temporarily, where you can end up in a place where there is absolutely no pain. There's no worries, no time. And I've had that experience. I know what that's like, and I know how seductive that is.
That's a good word.
Because who doesn't? I mean, if you could just stay there 24/7, there's your magical cure for. You don't have to do all this work to fix all this stuff, to deal with the sea creatures. They're just not there.
They're gone, but they're there.
But they're there because nobody can hold that, and that's not human. That's only, and so if a person is only being taught that kind of a practice, and this is what I was saying about if you get heavy duty into spiritual practice, the anxiety can ratchet up. Rather than down, because you're going to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, and you're going to find
more stuff,
more and more characters.
I want to keep that piece that you just put out, because it's so, I think we're getting to the real good meat of this. When you were talking about 20 minutes ago on there's first the ethics and then cultivating compassion and love, and then you go into the meditation.
Right.
There's almost this gray zone where people are thinking that mindfulness and meditation is about the mantras of compassion and love and kindness, gratitude. And one more point to that is I also think this paradox where we want to be compassionate and loving, of course. But then you also mentioned when you're talking about the gremlins or the sea creatures, anger. And you and I both know how important the expression and cultivation of healthy anger and aggression is. Most that I talk to or I see like on the media outlets, it's all about love and light and compassion and get rid of fear, get rid of anger. Where does the compassion and the love meld in with also these other deeper primal pieces of anger and even rage?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Compassion means being willing to be with the pain and the suffering of another being. That's what that's literally calm, community, passion, patio, to suffer, from the Latin, to suffer.
Got it.
So all of us, again, back to kind of the universal human condition, all of us have, have our traumas, all of us have our losses, our griefs, our sorrows, our rage, our injustices that we've experienced, or somebody we love, or somebody we're close to, or
something.
You're from a minority racial group or sexual orientation, So this is not something that is for those people. This is for
everyone.
All of us. Yeah.
All humans.
And compassion then isn't, this kind of be sweet and nice and da-da-da-da-da. It means you're willing to turn towards the person, turn towards your own experience, and turn towards them when they say, I'm being, publicly discriminated every day I walk down the street. Like, I don't know what that experience is like.
No.
I have no idea what that experience is like.
No.
I don't.
We don't.
I can hear somebody for whom that is a very deep, true experience of their reality. And I can feel a deep degree of compassion, as well as a huge degree of righteous anger, because they shouldn't be experiencing that. No. That is totally unfair. It's totally unmerciful. It's totally unjust. And I feel like I don't want to just be like, oh, I'm so sorry for you poor thing. Let me help you. Da da da. It's
almost like that's almost like a pitying.
Yeah, I should be like, this pisses me off. We got to change this. You shouldn't be going through that, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very easy place where compassion and a kind of sense of righteous indignation or anger or aggression go naturally together.
Love it.
Love, I would say compassion is being willing to be with the pain and the suffering of others and oneself. And love is really wanting the best for another. So it's really a deep wellspring of benevolence and wanting another being to be fundamentally, deeply blessed and happy. And I can also get upset similarly about the kinds of things that would cause people not to. I get pissed off that when I hear all this, it's all love and light and love. Then I get pissed off, right? I get really angry. Really angry when I am hearing people. I get sad. I certainly get touched by the sadness, but I also get very angry when I hear story after story of human beings with these terrible experiences in their childhood where they're just treated horribly. I get enraged by that.
Yes.
I think if I don't,
then
I think there's something wrong with me. I think that would be very worrisome if that kind of experience didn't
get you going,
burn my conscience, right? Like, this is not okay.
you would be that spiritual jerk.
Exactly. We're all in just this veil of tears, and isn't life horrible, and there's nothing we can do about it, and it's good that you have your meditation practice to get out of this hellish experience we're all in and just get off the wheel. No, that's just a bunch of BS.
Yes. And I agree. And it just if I take a step back and look at macro, because I know you like looking at the macro level, and I'm thinking of one of my teachers, Steve Hoskinson, and he and I also did a chat about this topic years ago, which I'll link up somewhere near this video. But we were talking about the need to refine the mind-body practices for current day. and this importance of realizing that we sometimes have to disconnect to bear a situation. If we think about traumatic events, when a child is young, they will dissociate and float above their body. In those instances, yes, thank God that occurs, but it also sets that person up to have that wiring has been set.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier for them to go into that sense of disconnection. And what I've seen in our world in a macro is because there has been so much trauma in all cultures. There's a preponderance for those people to seek out these practices that disconnect them even more because it's familiar. What do you see in that, and how do you think we can start to shift? I mean, it's such a big question.
Yeah.
It's not a one-shot kind of answer, and it's not one solution. It's multi-level. But any thoughts on this macro situation we've gotten into? Yeah.
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 Well, I have to.
Feel that one.
Yeah. So I said meditation was for spiritual awakening.
Yes.
And to me, the value, and it's a very important value. It's also a very partial value. So this is where I would disagree with a lot of the spiritual teacher types for whom sort of spiritual enlightenment is the end all be all, or it's really it's the pinnacle.
Yep.
I think there's a preciousness and a uniqueness, but I think it has to be part of a much, like you're saying, multiple kind of thing. But what that, for me, in my own experience, what that piece is to really fundamentally experience that everything is whole. That in the essence of life, things are fundamentally good and benevolent. And we can really kind of, in my experience, put our trust that is the essential nature of life. Now, to me, that essence is always expressed through existence.
Yes.
And the existence is in many cases nowhere near okay or good, and it can be absolutely atrocious and revolting and horrific. And both can be true. And I think both are true. And I think the value of a spiritual practice that would be incorporated into a larger kind of sense of what you're talking about is to have moments to be able to drop, because you and I hear really terrible stuff on a really regular basis. And in order for that to not destroy us, there needs to be a wellspring of, for me, fundamental benevolence, that I know that there is some deeper goodness that's at play here, and it's living us. And that is what gives me strength, and that is what gives me a sense of being willing now to re-engage. The seduction is always that place be the escape.
Yes.
But in a positive way, it could be sanctuary. It can be respite, and solace, which I really do fundamentally believe in. So it's subtle. Is it like, am I going to that place to run away?
Yep.
Or am I going there because it's time to recharge, to remember what is ultimately important, to connect with the goodness, and then get a feeling of now I can come back and, re-engage with the stuff that's not so good. And that to me is the key, is that being taught as a means of staying present so that you can stay and really affirm goodness and wholeness in the midst of this really messed up thing. But also be able to look it straight in the eyes and not collapse, not be freaked out, not be afraid, not be terrorized, but to be able to face what it is and to put forward a position of love, not this mealy, Valentine's cards and all this, I love my dog, or whatever. No, like
deep,
the fire,
human,
the heart,
earth, care.
To be full of joy in the midst of all this, and not by being checked out, and not by just being like, I got mine, screw all y'all, like to just really be a presence of really deep fundamental joy and resilience in this world, and show that you're not doing that by checking out. That to me is what spiritual practice is ultimately supposed to do.
Boom. Just what you said right there is, if there's this question that someone might be having, it's like, well, then what the heck is it? Is it mindfulness? Is it meditation? Should I not do this? Should I not have a mantra? What you just said, that this capacity to witness what is going on, to know that there is a lot of horror and trauma and adversity, and that there is this inherent wellspring of goodness. And I say this, no one is born wanting to harm other people. It isn't written in us in any way genetically. It gets taught to us, as we know, you and I. And I wanted to actually end on something. In your email to me, you talked about in the East, the mindfulness was heart-mind. Was that you made a distinction, and I liked it. So can you explain that?
Yeah. So for example, in the this would be like in Zen, like in the Chinese and the Japanese traditions of Zen Buddhism, the word again that we would translate something like mindfulness or mind was actually, in their understanding, what we would call heart and mind. So it was heart/mind, or mind-heart, or heart-mind, or dash, or whatever. And it was always the unity of the two. Mm-hmm. So we take this idea from another culture, another religion, different psychic disposition, kind of bring it over. And then we have in our culture, mind and heart tend to be fairly separated. And so then we hear, oh, well, this tradition is about teaching me how to train my mind, how to be mindful, how to use my mind. And so it becomes very mind-oriented, whereas the tradition itself is actually heart-mind in some kind of deep unity.
Connected.
Yeah, that there's a deeper kind of knowing, wisdom, that incorporates both an ability to be conscious and have street smarts and with each other, but actually carry this deep resonance. Like I'm not just I get you, but like I get you.
It's like an empathetic connection.
Yeah, we're in this thing together. Like I'm here with you.
Nice.
And that can get lost if you're just being told that it's about training your mind,
making it sharper, making the cortex more dense, right? Like that's what often is talked about. It's like, if you do this practice, and perhaps that's true, and like I said, I'm not looking at the research and scrutinizing it, but I know that that's some of the things that they will say. It's like, well, who cares if your cortex is more dense? Like, are you that jerk? Right. Are you able to treat your children in a kind manner even when they are driving you nuts? Right. And so we get caught up in this dualistic researchy thing where we're wanting these specific results of how it's affecting density and brain matter and all that. So
learning is a very basic technique, your mind to watch the stream of your consciousness and your thoughts, and having some general awareness in and of itself is fine. I don't want to come across like I'm slagging on that, but to then take that, which is only a part of sati or vipassana, and then turn it into this whole other thing. Same with any kind of meditation technique. If people were, affirmations for, weight loss, well, okay. Okay. Maybe that's part of it, but this idea that we can meditate ourselves out of our humanity, various kind of human problems, to me, the meditation is simply supposed to deepen the breadth of how much we're able to take in with love and stay centered, and that's what it's supposed to do.
There you go. I think that's a good place to end almost right there. I mean, we can keep going on different tangents, but if you were to offer those who are listening this, I don't want to say, it's not about advice, but your wish for how they may move forward. Say someone has been a devout meditator and now they're wondering, like, holy shit, am I actually doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, what would you say to that person who's now maybe more confused and has more questions, which maybe is a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I joke that I'm, spend my life as supposedly, some people call me a spiritual teacher. It's not really a term I like, but yeah. I spend my life telling people not to do spiritual practice. I'm a spiritual teacher. I'm basically trying to dissuade people constantly from it, but it's sort of half serious, half joking. But I think and I'm speaking again from personal experience.
Yes, of course.
As this hardcore enlightenment seeker guy for a good decade, I saw in real time both the lights and the serious shadows of that approach. And I don't want people to go through what I went through, like on just a very basic human level. You mentioned foundations.
Yes.
And if that's the thing I would say is foundations. Start with ethics. Start with somatic experiencing. Start with things where you learn what your emotions are about. Yeah. What is grief for? What is anger for? What is sadness for? If you've been taught this kind of model where there's plus emotions and there's minus emotions, and peace and joy, and you're supposed to be peaceful and joyous, go be angry. Go watch a movie that pisses you off. Go yell in the street. Get upset.
Get pissy.
To me, we got to stay human in this. And I just see a very deep lack of the foundations. Before we get into all the pyrotechnics, which are interesting and fascinating and have their place and everything, the stuff that's less sexy often is actually kind of better for the long haul,
It survives the test of time.
Yeah. It matters a lot that we care about people. And if you start to notice your spiritual practice is making you less caring, that would be for me a red flag.
Okay. Would you also say even, yeah, I agree. Also wanting to be less involved with people.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is actually something I thought we were going to end, but there's this thought that I'm an introvert, therefore I need to stay home and be a hermit. That's how I am. And I agree, some people are more destined to be more introspective and less out there and on stage. But basic human nature is such that we will die if we do not have social connection. Yeah. So what you're saying, and I agree with this, so it's great to have your check on this, is that if we are in a practice that we think is mindfulness-based, meditation-based, and we're finding ourselves less and less interested in engaging with other humans, that's probably a pretty big red flag that we're going down the wrong path.
That's a question mark.
Okay.
Because why? Again, is it I temporarily need some space?
Sure. We all need our space.
Yeah. I want to be silent for a week in a calm environment. Believe me, I have my days still every day where I'm like, God, I should go live in the mountains by myself. What the hell with this world, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so you got to be able to laugh about that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it starts being if it's not funny, if it's not a ha-ha joking, I'm able to joke about some, deep, dark stuff I got in my being. If it starts to become unfunny, for lack of a better word, if it starts getting very serious. And precious, and extra sensitive, that's where I would start to become cautious. I would be apprehensive in that case.
Good to know. I would also add, if someone is starting to get more physical symptoms, if you're becoming more tense, more tight, there's more pain, things that didn't pop up before, like maybe your digestion is going off, maybe you're not sleeping anymore and feeling rested, more colds, more viruses that linger longer, that is another sign that your system is going into kind of a shutdown. Because the body, because we are body beings, cannot generate and heal at the level that it's supposed to. So that's another telltale sign that practice that is supposedly to get us healthier and more resilient is actually making us more rigid and unhealthy.
I think it's important. Yeah, I mean, just to kind of overall, I would say that's why I always go back to what is meditation for and what is it not for?
Yes, good.
And what it is for is very specific. And it's not, for example, to learn how to deal with your physiology around trauma. Mm-hmm. It's not what it's designed to do. Okay. It can absolutely work in concert.
Complement.
With a different practice that is designed specifically for that issue. Mm-hmm. Then you have a great combination. But when we start having, this is where I get worried, where meditation now becomes a panacea. Whatever kind of meditation it is, mindfulness is probably the most popular, but it could be, again, yoga or any number of things. Mm-hmm. When it starts to become, I got this problem, meditation's your answer. In the worst of cases, then money gets involved. Then there's charlatans. Mm-hmm. There's lots of good, well-intentioned people as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But, you get this kind of snake oil salesman thing. Sometimes I think, like, in the old way they were saying, like, drink this and it'll get rid of arthritis and tooth pain and, other problems. And it's like, well, it's snake oil, right? So meditation is not designed for all these other things. That doesn't mean it couldn't be used with other practices in a way that's helpful.
In addition to.
If you're getting really deeply into meditation, you are going to surface deep, dark stuff. And I would say at minimum, you have to have some other practice to help deal with that deep, dark stuff when it comes up. Because just being taught to meditate more and to meditate your way through it and just keep going and keep watching it and keep going down and that is a recipe for disaster.
All right. I agree. And I think that's actually a very good place to end. Okay. And even though we ended with the word disaster, that goes quite nicely with the gremlins deep in the sea that we've been talking about, which I think really we all need to look at and face in a way that is engaged. And like you said, almost a little humorous.
Yeah.
And serious. So
the humor is important to have to know when it's serious and when it's not.
Of course.
Gotta have a perspective. Yeah.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you're watching this, obviously Chris's information is down below, chrisdierkes.com. If you like to read some good articles, he's a good writer, so make sure you check out his stuff. And obviously you see clients, people.
I do. Real in the flesh.
Real in the flesh.
Human beings.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, my dear. We will talk
Thank
to
you.
you again.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks for being here. Be sure to share this video with people if you think this will be of use to someone you know in your world, whether your clients or your family or your friends. And be sure to subscribe to my channel. Look for my head, click on that, that'll take you there. Then you'll get my videos as they roll out every week and you won't miss any of them. Take good care. Bye for now.